Title: The Crown Prince's new female staff author, Blood Blue copywriting. Xiaoyu, a daughter, walks the rivers and lakes and the court, holding the Lord's order, good at controlling violence with violence, leading the Xia family army, and guarding the northern end of the fortress. Qi Lianzhai, the prince of the dynasty, ruled for 3 years, worked hard to rule, and asked Xiaoyu to be a courtier. Xiaoyu is a strange girl full of fine braids. Because she holds the order of the Lord of Jianghu, her power is mysterious, and she is a well-known figure in Jianghu. At this time, Wang Yu, a courtier, is lawless in the capital. Qi Lianzhai is afraid of Wang Yu's Jianghu people, helpless. Next, use the unicorn chapter to go to Xia's house in Sibei to invite her out of the mountain. I thought that the head of the Xia family was a man, but after the person came, Qi Lianzhai watched her kill an assassin with her bare hands, and nodded with satisfaction. After meeting, the ruler and the minister become husband and wife, and the power becomes cloudy. Male lead: I love you. Hostess: don't love me, it doesn't work. Male protagonist: be a princess for Gu. Hostess: I am destined to be a lonely wolf in Sibei, and no one should stop me from dedicating myself to the country. One day banquet, Xiaoyu Chinese medicine, Qi Lianzhai was drunk. Then all night long. Hostess: which gave me the medicine? Male lead: I'm so happy, Au is finally mine. 1v1, Double C, the male protagonist really reveals his true nature after piercing the window paper with the female protagonist. Demoning: there are Lily Dan Mei elements. Overall, it is a scheming and succinct article that degrades wisdom. Precious and ruthless, loyal dog, wife, strict management. Content label: strong inspirational life. Search keywords: protagonist, Xiaoyu, Qi Lianzhai. Supporting role, others. 1 sentence introduction: a noble girl became a new staff member of the Crown Prince. Purpose: there is always someone who makes you feel that the world is worthwhile. Suan 21 years, in July. Qianjing has had plenty of rain this year. It has been raining for several days in a row. Due to the muddy road, there are many fewer pedestrians. The people of the Qi dynasty regarded black gold as a symbol of power, and the royal family was even more willing to wear black robes, but the prince himself only wore white robes on weekdays, which added to the clearness. Father, slow down. The Tokugawa bowed and followed behind the man, and with a creak, the black mansion gate lined with 9 gold and bronze beads closed. With an umbrella in his hand, he immediately followed the man with small steps. I was thinking of holding an umbrella for the man, but the man turned around after taking the bamboo umbrella. Tokugawa watched the tall figure go farther and farther, and hurriedly gestured towards a few blue-clothed guards behind him. Follow up: a few guards followed after realizing it, but they didn't dare to get too close to the master in front of them. They kept a few meters away and followed closely behind. After the prince took charge of government affairs 3 years ago, he moved out of the palace independently and formed his own government affairs team. Since then, the court has been cleaned up a lot, and people's livelihood has improved. It is very similar to the prelude to the prosperous era of Emperor Tang's opening of Zhenguan. But the main lord himself didn't say anything about this, and he still went to the political council every day to do his best to rule, and by the way, he solved a few courtiers who were causing trouble in the court, and occasionally played a chess game with Xiao Yi, the commander of Jinyue. Seeing the rain getting heavy again, Tokugawa put his hands in his sleeves, and told the female official who followed behind him, "Send a few more people to serve in the political council, and burn the dragon on the ground." The crown prince was known to suffer from cold symptoms, and everyone in Genjing knew that this arrangement was reasonable. Tokugawa took the whisk presented by his apprentice and entered the prince's mansion. The female official looked up at the plaque of Prince's mansion, and went in after a while. In the political assembly hall, strands of incense rose from the filigree porcelain furnace, circled, lifted into the sky, and slowly dissipated until the well-head ceiling painted with golden dragon patterns. There were only a few tables and chairs in the hall. Even the maids are pitiful and empty. Sitting and standing in the hall, Huo Shijun was discussing matters with the prince. Then the head of the Xia family has already arrived in the capital, and just sent the letter to the mansion. Qi Lianjai put down the booklet at hand, picked up the cold tea cup beside him, and drank it lightly. The man's eyebrows are stern, his facial features are grand and delicate, and there is an unspeakable extravagance hidden in his every move. Huo Shijun is known as the world's first strategist. He was 5 or 6 years older than the prince, and it was the moment when he was ambitious and high-spirited. He often wore a scholar's coat and held a certain book of scriptures and history in his hand, and read it whenever he had free time. He appeared dressed in black and leaned slightly to the side to ask. His face was also handsome and tough, and his temperament was loose, and he could see it at a glance in the crowd. Qi Lianjai raised his eyes slightly when he heard that, and gently opened his lips. It is rumored that the patriarch of the Xia family holds the Jianghe Lord's decree and can mobilize the Jianghe forces at will. Although he has already received my Kailan badge, it is still unknown whether this person can use it. In the past few days, the two rulers and ministers have been discussing the matter of the Xia family's patriarch, but when he entered the capital, they did not notice it in advance. On the one hand, it can be said that this patriarch is very capable. The rain was still falling outside the hall, and the rainwater in front of the door accumulated into a small stream and slowly drained into the ground along the ditch. The light rain was like a pearl dripping on the ground, crisp and pleasant. Huo Shijun glanced at the sky outside. The rain made him feel uncomfortable, and he always felt that one after another of icy machine fronts were digging into his body, and the coolness was penetrating. There was a very small buzzing sound suddenly in the rain. Huo Shijun didn't realize it, and was still looking at the sky, but Qi Lianjai's hand holding the teacup froze. Boom! Several shadows suddenly smashed from the eaves to the ground, and fell down like a dead fish. Huo Shijun hadn't realized how many people were dead, but his instinct had made him shout loudly, "Escort!" But the hall was empty, and none of the guards seemed to hear the sound. The man in the main seat paused for a second, and continued to drink tea in a second, but Huo Shijun had a thorn all over his body, tightly protecting Qi Lianjai. But still no sound, still it was terribly silent, as if a needle could be heard falling. Huo Shijun even breathed a little lighter, his eyes were fixed on the black clothes in front of the hall. These people are obviously the assassins who were sent to assassinate the crown prince, but now they have been wiped cleanly on their necks. What is going on? Mr. Huo, step back. Huo Shijun frowned, but obediently put away his defensive posture and stood behind the lord again. Bang! 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 It was another sound of heavy objects hitting the ground several times in a row. The sound was dull and dense, but in the next half an hour, it sometimes stopped, and sometimes it was like beating a drum. When Qi Lianjai heard this voice, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. In the next second, an extremely clear female voice resounded in the air. There are too many dark whistles staring at the political assembly hall, why do you keep them there? This female voice had a bit of a complaint, and it overlapped with the white figure fluttering from the eaves. The woman was dressed in capable white shorts and white trousers, and her black hair was neatly braided. Before Huo Shijun could react, she entered the hall. When he looked again, his eyes were straight. As the woman walked, the white clothes were elegant and silent, and the short scar of the bird's tail feather between the eyebrows was firmly engraved on her face. Her eyes were cold and sharp, like an unsheathed sword. It took me some effort to go to Beijing today. Wang Yu's people chased and blocked me along the way. They wanted me to die 10 times and 8 times, so I didn't come here early. Presumably this is the #1 strategist in the world, Mr. Huo. I am the daughter of Xie Qiagong of Sibei, Xie Yu, the current head of the Xie family. I came here on the order of the prince, and I met for the first time. Please advise me a lot. The woman bowed slightly, and Huo Shijun returned the salute. The white fingertips had a thin layer of yellow calluses. She took a token from her waist with her fingers, strode forward, and handed it to the man sitting in the main seat. The token was made of brown wood in a circular shape, with a knife engraved on it. The token also carried the enthusiasm around her waist. Qi Lianjai had been looking at her from the moment she entered the hall, and now she could not help but turn her attention to this token. Has the prince heard of the Shadow Tower? Qi Lianjai rubbed the token before speaking. Jianghu Shadow Building has publicly stated that it has invested in Wang Yu's command. Good. Xia Yu crossed her chest with both hands, raised her eyebrows and continued, the Shadow Tower only took over the grievances of the rivers and lakes in the past few years, but in the past 2 years, it has been with the court and has been hated by the rivers and lakes. I plan to have a good deal with the old man Wang Yu to see if his Shadow Tower is empty first, or if I'll die first. This is quite arrogant. Wang Yu, a court official, has minions all over the world, and has a deep foundation, which is quite disadvantageous to the court and the royal family. 3 years ago, since the emperor fell into a coma and Qi Lianjai took charge of the East Palace, although the government was clear and bright, there has been a great improvement. But for Wang Yu, it was painless. In order to clear Wang Yu's cancer, Qi Lianjai thought of many strategies, but most of Wang Yu's men were all strategists. Therefore, Qi Lianjai thought of asking the Xia family, who also has the power of Jianghu, to come out. 2.5 months ago, Qi Lianjai sent the token Kailanjiang to the Xia family to show the sincerity of asking the Xia family to come out. That's why Xia Yu traveled thousands of miles to the capital just to assist Qi Lianjai. But along the way, I don't know who leaked the news. Wang Yu seems to have known the identity of her Xia family's family head. All the way, they chased and blocked them. Wang Yu's people. When Xia Yu was 20 years old, she had never experienced this kind of suffocation, but she wanted to meet the prince as soon as possible, and she was outnumbered by herself, so she could only flee overnight, and it took 2 months to reach the capital. When Huo Shaijun heard her words, he immediately thought that she had killed so many assassins in silence just now, and looked at the woman with respect in his eyes. Qi Lianjai smiled slightly, Master Xia is domineering. As soon as the words fell, Qi Lianjai in the seat slowly raised his head, and Xia Yu's expression was also stunned, as if he had noticed something. Mr. Huo, why don't you hide for a while? Boom! The cold sword energy was like a poisonous snake coming out of a hole and attacked from behind. Xia Yu's expression remained unchanged. The woman's right leg was wrapped in deep internal force, then turned around and hacked the person's back. The assassin wanted to sneak up on her back. Unexpectedly, the woman's reaction was too fast and he directly spun him into the hall, and the assassin lay on the ground in embarrassment. In the flash of light and flint, Huo Shaijun couldn't even see Xia Yu's movements. He subconsciously stepped back, but caught a glimpse of Qi Lianjai beside him still drinking tea lightly, without even a glance at the two fighting in the field. As soon as the assassin gritted his teeth, the sword in his hand had not slackened, but because of Xia Yu just now, the inner strength in his hand was poured back into his meridians without sending it out, and his inner breath was confused for a moment. But he still rushed forward with his hands and feet. Xia Yu frowned, seeing that he actually wanted to enter the hall to assassinate Qi Lianjai. A powerful internal force erupted from his danshan, and the assassin was stunned. In the hall, Qi Lianjai's case seemed to be blown by a strong wind, so she cast an apologetic look. When Qi Lianjai received that look, he wanted to say something, but when he heard a push, the bright red blood stained the woman's white arrow sleeves. She had a smile on her lips, but she still didn't take it back, but her hand was beside the assassin's neck. Walked around. Huo Shaijun's eyes shrank, only to feel that the hall was so silent, so quiet that he could hear his heartbeat thumping clearly. The author has something to say, the content is the same, please change the typography and typos. I was too impatient when I posted the chapter before, sorry. The pure aesthetics of violence is based on the extreme brutality and bloodshed. Huo Shaijun saw with his own eyes that the assassin was pierced through the trachea by the hand of the weak-looking woman, and only then did he realize that she was the head of the Xie family, the female devil who is also known as Qingjiangdeji in Jianghu. There was silence in the hall, only listening to her. This person is useless, a clown jumping beams, nothing to talk about. The guard beside her was very discerning. Xiaoyu took the handkerchief and wiped the blood on her hands lightly. Her eyes seemed peaceful, but they had hidden sharpness. She looked at Qi Lianjai and smiled soothingly. Your Highness should rest assured about the strength of my Xie family this time. At the moment when the assassin came, Xiaoyu knew that the assassin was purely to spy on her strength. It has long been known that this prince is not as easy to get along with as rumored, but she still did not expect that he would be able to cut off in such a direct way, and gave her a big gift on the first side. The man was in a very happy mood. The blood in the hall did not stimulate him. He took up the teacup and gave Xiaoyu a cup of respect. Patriarch Xie is unparalleled in elegance. This is the real recognition. Huo Shijun looked at the corpse that was slowly dragged away on the ground, and the blood stains that were terrifying, and the throbbing in his heart was still not calmed down. The man sips tea and lightly opens his lips. Master Xie, have you ever heard of the flood in Pingzhou? Xiaoyu, who was next, raised her eyebrows slightly, and the fine and delicate braids on her head were attached to the back of her head. She tore off one of them and rubbed it, thinking, I'll go. Pingzhou is located in the south of the Yangtze River, and there have been frequent floods over the years. However, this year, the number of casualties and the loss of public property were extremely heavy. The prefect of Pingzhou took all the blame and hanged himself. This case shocked the government and the public. At first, Qi Lianjai simply sent someone to investigate and found out that it was the work of Wang Yu, but it was difficult for no one to lead him. No one is willing to take this kind of hard work. As early as when the Pingzhou flood incident happened, she sent her own hidden piles to investigate, but the evidence was deeply hidden by Wang Yu, and those hidden piles did not find anything. There was no hesitation in the woman's voice, a pair of smart eyes dropped slightly, and one hand wrapped around her braid, as if thinking about something. Qi Lianjai smiled slightly. Qianjing is known as the paradise of the floating world. The streets and alleys are full of gates and courtyards. Even the bottom hawkers and merchants live in small courtyards with red bricks and blue tiles. The main street extends from the imperial city to the outside, and there are carved beams and painted buildings, and every inch is meticulously carved. The street market is a prosperous city that never sleeps. There were distinguished guests tonight at Duke Cheng's mansion, and everyone below was banned from discussing this matter. The setting sun is like blood, and the lotus pond in the courtyard reflects the rays of the waves, which are either red or orange. There are also birds pecking and playing in the pond. A small and cheap covered bridge is built on the lotus pond to connect the winding corridors. On the other side of the bridge, a phoenix made of golden silk and red sandalwood stood quietly, surrounded by guards, palace maids, and eunuchs. The laughter in the house quietly poured out through the mullioned windows. At this time, the daughter of Jin Chenggong, Queen Sun Yueying, was surrounded by everyone in front of the screen. The master and servants laughed together, and the atmosphere was harmonious. Look at Rua Wei, she looks more and more handsome. When you get married, let's marry Liang Yet as a daughter-in-law. Aunt. The girl was wearing a peach-colored shattered glazed immortal dress, with turquoise shawls hanging on her slender arms. At this moment, her cheeks were flushed with shame, she stomped her feet and turned her back. Sun Ruoyi's mother and daughter-in-law of Jincheng's eldest son-in-law, Mrs. Lu, was wearing a purple-toned house uniform at this time. Seeing this, she begged the Empress for mercy. Ruoyi is a thin-skinned girl, so don't make fun of her. The queen lives up to her name, with a graceful face and fair skin like a good suet jade. At the age of more than 40, she still has the tactful aura of a half-old MILF. She raised her smiling eyes, took her sister-in-law's hand and patted it. What are you afraid of? The two of them have been engaged since childhood, and Rua Wei and her daughter are going to marry into the royal family. When the prince of the dynasty, Qi Lianjai, had entered into a marriage contract with Sun Ruoyi, the granddaughter of Duke Qinggong's direct descendant since childhood, although it was only a verbal agreement. According to the oath, at the end of this year, Sun Ruoyi and his concubine will marry into the prince's mansion at the beginning of next year. After Xiaoyu returned to the prince's mansion, he first met his two guards. Master, as soon as they entered the gate of the mansion, there were two female guards wearing blue clothes and strong suits. The two of them had ponytails tied high behind their heads. The hanging flower gate separates the front hall of the prince's mansion from the backyard. Xiaoyu nodded slightly to those people and walked towards them. One of the female guards was named Xiaobao, tall, with a short sword wrapped around her waist, and her high ponytail was tied with a silver hairpin. You can see the work of the two. How is the situation in Pingzhou? Under control. Before entering Beijing, Xiaoyu paid attention to Pingzhou. The guards who followed Xiaoyu along the way saw that the three of them did not do anything else, so they retreated with confidence. Every brick and tile in the prince's mansion is a delicate thing, but unfortunately at night, Xiaoyu glanced at the exquisite courtyard gate and the visible luxury inside, and became suspicious. Master, what's the problem? This yard is too luxurious. The woman's eyes were heavy and her voice was faint, but 1 foot had already stepped into the yard. Ordinary councillors usually only live in the wing of the side courtyard, and Huo Shijun, the #1 councillor in the world, only has a small courtyard. The Yulan courtyard is the largest and most exquisite courtyard in the entire prince's mansion except for the main courtyard. Although she is now one of the staff of the prince's mansion, the specifications of this waiting room. Xiaoyu's eyes flashed, and she entered the main room safely. The news that Xiaoyu was staying in Yulan courtyard had already reached Qilianzhai, and Huo Shijun was at the side. Huo Shijun reminded, His Royal Highness, I remember that Yulan courtyard was built for the future mistress. Qilianzhai has been critiquing papers all day. Now that he has settled the government affairs, he rubbed his brows, stood up and said, let's watch it. Huo Shijun had a number in his mind right away. The next day, Xiaoyu changed into a convenient loose robe and went out of the house. Qianjing Early Hutong, Hongchen Inn. There are 2 big red columns in front of the inn to hold up the plaque. As soon as you enter the door, it is the vestibule. At this time, there is a lot of noise. The guests come and I will push the cup for a change. It is very lively. The clerk who ran the hall and the treasurer of the beads disappeared, leaving only a few short-term candidates for the job. No one paid attention to Xiaoyu when she came in. She stood in front of the door as if waiting for someone. After a few breaths, there was a crisp flute sound in everyone's ears. The sound of the flute is icy, and the knife cuts the heart. It is pleasant to listen to, but the murderous aura is also looming. Quick, quick, let's go, most of that woman has an enemy. As soon as the voice fell, half of the guests on the first floor stood up and packed their luggage. Those with quick legs and feet rushed out in the rain. The flute gradually approached the inn. But Digissima. Xiaoyu raised her eyes and looked upstairs, her brown eyes were like snake pupils, her whole body was as sharp as a sheathed sword, her hands were slightly behind her back, and she took a step forward and stood still. Exactly, Xiaoyu and I were sent to kill you, you must be prepared. The man smiled again, and slowly walked down the stairs with his waist twisted. His 2 red sleeves were surprisingly long, and they were being pinched in both hands, swaying like a dustpan that could not be turned over. Another flute sounded in his ears, and the needles all over the sky were as dense as cobwebs towards Xiaoyu who was standing at the door. I saw that the red sleeves that the man was holding in his hands just now wrapped the needles and internal force to take the long dragon. It is to wrap Xiaoyu's neck. The sky of red shrouded people's sight. However, he saw that the white robe moved suddenly, his right foot was on the threshold behind him, and the next second, it bounced into the air like a leaf, and all the needles were already nailed to the ground. The woman hooked the red silk-like water sleeve with her left foot. The man upstairs was sitting firmly on Mount Tai, but the white figure suddenly rolled him down the stairs. Strength is the strength of strength, although there is a way of using softness to overcome rigidity in ancient times, but in front of absolute strength, it is too late to even cover up one's weakness. The icy cold breath suddenly invaded his mouth, and he was terrified that his right leg was hooked on the handrail of the building, and he lowered his waist and wanted to break back his strength. Just listening to the woman snorted coldly, her figure appeared on the man's waist and abdomen like a ghost. But so. The right hand changed from the palm to the claw, and the afterimage was drawn straight in the air. When she stopped, there was a shrill scream in the air. Xiaoyu withdrew his hand, turned around, bent over and smashed the man under the doorpost. Boom, the floor was smashed with defects. Broken jade. Why didn't you come out before she finished speaking? Xiaoyu used her toes to lift the broken porcelain piece at her feet and shot it out. She had strong inner strength, and the porcelain piece crossed a few meters and broke the vitality of the ghost in red, and the shouting suddenly stopped. Stop, it's pretty weird. However, before the flute in the air was over, Xiaoyu looked upstairs and picked up the rag on the table to wipe the blood on his hands. The little who were hiding in the backyard had already been shattered by the sound of the flute, and at this moment Kikiao fell to the ground bleeding. As expected of Qingjiangdeji, the slave family saw it today. A feminine female voice hangs upstairs, her terrifying white hair grows to her ankles, a light green floral skirt can barely cover the ups and downs of her chest, her skin is fair, her face is covered with green gauze, and her right hand is exposed with dense tattoos. There is also a Gahan behind him. At this time, he was holding the flute in one hand and the yellow paper secret letter in the other. Assassination of the prince has long been contracted by Shadow Studio. If there is no accident, you will be noisy for one day in the capital. She tapped her toes. Xiaoyu saw her intention to escape, but did not stop her. The slave family can't beat you, let's stop here today, this is your gift. As soon as the words fell, a mist spread in front of the door, and the woman's figure disappeared. The author has something to say. Still only the layout has been changed, but the content has not changed. When Qi Lianjai received the news from the Hongchen Inn, Xiaoyu had wiped off the blood on his hands and left the crime scene. She grew up in the mundane world since she was a child, and she was far more cruel to kill people than the secret guards cultivated by the imperial court. Therefore, she knew how to solve the grievances of the rivers and lakes by means of the rivers and lakes. For a while, Qi Lianjai couldn't monitor her whereabouts and felt a little uneasy. He frowned slightly. This person is not easy to deal with. Huo Shijian's eyes flashed. His Royal Highness, it is also for Wang Yu that it is difficult to deal with. It is a good thing for us. He continued, I don't know how the Xie family cultivated this patriarch. Qi Lianjai laughed, gently twisted the mouth of the teacup, and said, the Xie family started out about 200 or 300 years ago with a female general. Although this female general Xie Yunying was born as a daughter, the Xie family's maiden army led by her broke through the foreign enemy's homeland and abruptly expanded the territory of the former dynasty. Double. The reason why this women's army is unprecedentedly strong is because the female generals used a very terrifying training method, which is specifically aimed at women. It is precisely because of this that the Xie family's family leaders are almost all women from generation to generation. But when the female general was in her twilight years, the laws of the previous dynasty and related literati suddenly tightened on women. In order to ensure the status of Xie's women in the family, Xie Yunying directly set up ancestral instructions. The two sides defend the world. As for how to choose a Xie family head among them, it's probably the killing of siblings, the civil and military competition, and the experience of life and death. These family secrets are all recorded in the royal family's texts. Qi Lianjai was familiar with it when he was young, and he naturally knew what Xiaoyu faced when he became the head of the Xie family. I heard that the man's eyes were blinded, and the catchers who went to investigate threw up a few on the spot. Hey, those little girls on duty are pitiful. They were killed by the murderer who played the flute. The massacre at early Hutong in Genjing swept through the corners of Genjing in only half an hour. Rumors spread like snow in the sky and spread to high-level courtyards all over Qianjing. Under the suppression of Wang Yu and the royal family, the powerful did not dare to move half a cent, so they told the people below them not to talk about it privately, but there are always people in the camps on both sides. Some are not clear, such as the queen's concubine. Xia Yu took 2 female guards, Xia Ruyi and Xia Abao, to wander around Genjing. As long as they saw Wang Yu's hidden stake, they either smashed the house or made trouble. Xia Abao took off the fake Adam's apple and fanned his face with a leaf. "Master, we are making such a big move, so we won't make Wang Yu anxious." The 3 of them, dressed in colorful robes, squatted on the tree, taking advantage of no one to catch their breath. A dark light flashed in Xia Yu's eyes. "I just want to make a noise, and after we leave in 2 days, let Xiao Liuzi arrange 3 people of the same size as us to continue making trouble, and let him know that I have been in the capital. They are going to leave for Pingzhou in 2 days. At this time, Wang Yu can't let Wang Yu divert his energy to Pingzhou. It is better to make a sound so that he can't tell what they want to do." How many troubles did we have today? Wang Yu infiltrated the defense and intelligence of the entire capital, no wonder the prince was helpless against him. On this day, there must be 4. "Okay, let's go home and rest." When the 3 of them passed by the alley, they found that there were guards from the brigade surrounded by the alley, and Xia Yu immediately retracted the foot he was about to step out. Xia Ruyi saw that there was a Luan driver, and whispered to Xia Yu, "It's a Luan sedan chair." The Empress lifted the curtain with her jade hand and whispered to the mammy beside her. "Is there something important for the lady?" Empress Sun sighed, picked up the Buddha string on her right wrist and started to coil it up. The prince has been in power since 3 years ago, and he has less time to return to the palace. Now he is about to get married, and he doesn't want to talk to this palace. Ruowei is such a good girl, why can't he look down on her? There were fine lines around her almond eyes. When she said this, she couldn't help but feel the bitterness of a mother. When Madame Lu saw that her straight back was bent, she felt distressed instantly. "Niang Niang, your majesty is in a coma now, and the crown prince alone takes up the burden of starting the dynasty. The affairs are naturally busy on weekdays. If you are really worried, you can ask the palace servants to spread the word. The prince is benevolent and filial, and will not abandon you." Madame Lu said so, but she knew Empress Sun's plan better than anyone else. She was born in Jincheng Gongfu, and now the queen's elder brother is worthy of the position of Zhenqi in Zhenshifu in the court, but the official position of the 3rd grade is far from maintaining the glory of her mother's family. Although the adults were arguing about the marriage between Sun Ruoyi and the prince when the prince was young, but he did not get the approval of the prince himself, but the empress made her own way to contact him. Unavoidably have to preach a few times. But even Madame Lu knew in her heart that the status of the daughter of Jincheng Gongfu's wife and prince was still too low. Listening to the queen's self-pity again, Madame Lu agreed, but her mind wandered away. The 3 of them practice martial arts, and their ears are first class. Xia Yu caught the key eye, and immediately understood what Qi Lianjai was thinking. "Our crown prince really makes the best use of everything," Xia Yu laughed inexplicably. Before the 2 girls could think about what happened, they saw the owner of the house kicked on the wall and disappeared. The 2 looked at each other and immediately followed. Back at the Yulan courtyard, the 2 attendants fell on the soft couch to rest, and as soon as they took a breath, they saw Xia Yu squatting on the ground and rummaging through her luggage. She picked out the lightest and most immortal skirt. "The prince hasn't come back yet." The queen looked displeased, put down the herbal tea she had refilled for the 2nd cup, stared at Tokugawa and continued to scold, "Bengong is also his biological mother, and now it's hard to come to see him once, he just hides from Bengong, this is all it's time for Hai, and the gate of the palace will be locked, even if he really has official business, can't he come back earlier with the friendship of this palace?" Tokugawa bowed his waist and pleaded guilty again and again, "Oh, madam, You don't know, there have been many floods in various places recently, and the prince's affairs have suddenly become busy. The letter came just now, and he will be back in a while. It was at this moment that Madame Lu hurried back to the house in her palace attire, holding the handkerchief in her hand, with her ear beside the queen. Tokugawa couldn't hear him, but he rolled his eyes and simply stood aside, and Xuandang escorted him. He even hit a woman. The queen originally wanted Sun Ruoyi to be her daughter-in-law, but now something went wrong. She was so angry that she slapped the incense table, and the good gilt incense burner was knocked to the ground with a slap. Dechuan, show me the way, and call me the woman from Mulan courtyard, but I want to see, the crown prince of the East Palace has not yet got married, and she is so charming to the master, it's not a good thing to think about. The queen shouted with a red neck while shaking her handkerchief. Madame Lu, who was behind her, carefully supported her. In front was a palace made with a lantern. Tokugawa followed closely behind. It took several turns to reach the Yulan courtyard. Xiaoyu naturally knew the news of the queen's entry into the mansion. She had already finished bathing at this time, and her long hair like a waterfall was swaying on the bed. A light white dress, fair skin, although not wearing makeup, it is also a national beauty. Xiaoyu is shorter in stature. She still holds the sword in her hand, and Xiaobao was standing by the bed. Seeing this, she simply sat on the ground and asked, "Master, what's the situation now?" Since she was a child, her ear was amazing, and she had been listening to the queen's loud movements from afar. Xiaoyu grabbed the apple in her hand, broke half of it and gave it to her. Hearing that, chewing the apple in his mouth, he said, "Prince, use me as a shield. No wonder the queen is so eager to run to us." Xiaoyu was so frightened that the apples in her mouth fell. She was born clean and cute and round. Xiaobao, who was beside her, pinched her face leisurely and sat down. Xiaoyu chose to ignore the ambiguous atmosphere of the two, and threw the apple core into the wooden barrel beside him, and then slowly got up. Seeing this, the two female guards stood up and stepped back. It was at this moment that the queen and her party had passed through the empty main hall, but they found that there was no expected sound of dogs and horses in the backyard, the lights were bright, there were only layers of curtains rising and falling, dancing freely with the wind, the road. Occasionally there are lanterns that light up on the side, as if reminding that someone lives here. In the house, only dim candles swayed gently, and the breeze blew softly. It was indescribably quiet. The queen's footsteps slowed down, and the mood of the people behind her gradually calmed down. The author has something to say, still only the layout has been changed, but the content remains the same. A woman in a white dress was dancing a sword under the moon, bare feet and hair scattered. The sword was sharp and her body was elegant. The queen's eyes were slightly startled, staring at the figure as if she was speechless. As night fell, the starry sky cast a cloud of dark blue on the woman's white dress. She seemed to sense someone was intruding. She turned around and pulled up a sword flower. Madame Lu reacted quickly, knowing that the queen was shocked. She couldn't help but reprimanded, "I haven't come to see the queen." Xiaoyu heard the words and walked forward with a standard general salute. "Chen Xiaoyu, I have seen the queen's niece, the niece is 1,000 years old, 1,000 years old, 1,000 years old." Hearing Xiaoyu's self-declaration, Madame Lu frowned and glanced at the queen with suspicion in her eyes. "Which family's daughter are you? Why don't you behave in boudoir manners?" Xiaoyu squatted on the ground and immediately clasped his fists and said, "This minister is the eldest daughter of Duke Xiat, currently serving in Sibei Xiejian, commanding Tongzi from the 3rd grade. It was originally a woman from the Xie family." The queen and Madame Lu looked at each other. Tokugawa calmly reminded behind him, "The women of the Xie family have a tradition of joining the army since ancient times, and 2/3 of the Xie family's army is the women's army." The queen's face softened a little, but she still looked at Xiaoyu with a critical look. "Why are you in the prince's mansion? You are an unmarried daughter of Yunying, aren't you afraid of losing your reputation?" When it came to the last sentence, it was already stern, empty, and only the queen's words seemed to hit the water, with a slight echo, sharp and harsh. When Xiaoyu saw the moon-white corner of his clothes in the distance, he wisely didn't answer. The queen mother's temper should be restrained. The man in the distance put one hand behind his back and played with the wrench on his thumb with the other. He saw Xiaoyu's dressing eyes move slightly, and his eyes fell on the top of the woman's hair. Seeing that she was still kneeling on the ground motionless, he slowly stepped forward to support her. Pick her up. Huo Shijun behind him only regarded himself as a transparent person, and immediately followed him after seeing eunuch Tokugawa. Seeing the surprised and angry eyes from the queen, Qi Lianjai patted the back of Xiaoyu's hand deliberately, and his big cold palms covered those white hands. How can the atmosphere look so charming? The people beside the queen suddenly felt their minds floating and suddenly realized. Xiaoyu's eyes moved slightly. Seeing that the man had blocked the eyes of the queen, she breathed a sigh of relief, but her hand was still held by Qi Lianjai's palm and did not let go. She then said softly, "Your Highness has finished dealing with the government affairs." Xiaoyu softened her waist, revealing half of her white and tender neck, and looked slightly sideways at the man in front of her. There were a few strands of loose hair hanging on her forehead. Qi Lianjai stared at her calmly for a breath. His tone was calm, but much softer than usual. He took her by the shoulders, and led someone towards the house. "You go back first, I'll handle it here." The queen's angry voice came from behind. "Qi Lianjai, do you still have my mother in your eyes?" Xiaoyu quietly tugged at the man's sleeve, and his brown eyes rolled, indicating that he was okay, and then Qi Lianjai took back the hand that was on the woman's shoulder. Qi Lianjai's face was flat, and the two let go of the hands they had just held, and the voice was no longer as gentle as it sounded just now, and gave Xiaoyu a look and turned away. "I heard that my mother is still thinking about the marriage between Gu and Jincheng's family." She made it clear that today's game of chess was half successful. Xiaoyu flicked the hem of her clothes and went back to the house with her hands behind her back. The task of her left and right was completed, and the rest was up to the crown prince himself. Sun. On the second day, the sun was shining brightly. Xiaoyu was sorting out the affairs at Yulan courtyard. Her hair was tied down on the back of her head. A few strands sneaked out while the woman was bowing her head and sprinkled on her ear. She loosened her wrist and Xiaoyu turned her neck. "When I opened my eyes, there was a commotion at the gate of the courtyard. You guys get out of the way, I must check it out today." "Ah, how dare you push me? Bitch! Today, I must see which Xiao Xiao stole my brother prince." The girl in the pink skirt ignored the servant's pull and went straight into the courtyard. Unexpectedly, as soon as she got out of the siege, she met a woman with a black robe and a black robe. The woman looked indifferent, with sharp thorns all over her body, and the chill from her brown eyes forced Sun Ruoyi back 2 steps. Sun Ruoyi trembled and did not dare to approach her, but her eyes were fixed on her gorgeous and bewitching appearance, only to feel that her heart was cut into pieces. It turned out that the prince's brother abandoned her because of this woman. Xiaoyu watched the girl cry silently, her brows wrinkled again, and asked aloud, "Are you okay?" There are many plants in Yulan courtyard, and the strong fragrance of flowers will surround people in summer. Seeing that several cats are getting impatient, and the sun has tanned Xiaoyu so much that her skin is burning, Xiaoyu had no choice but to organize your words and try to speak to her gently. "I know that you are saddened by the loss of your husband, but if you are really a sensible girl, you should know that the royal family's in-laws are all calculations linked together, so why bother yourself, because you have never cared about you at all. People who have passed you shed tears, the marriage contract between the two of you is nothing but the queen's will, and the crown prince has never promised, even once." Sun Ruoyi's voice trembled, like a cub trapped in a quagmire. "Sitting on my aunt's knee since I was a child, many people have told me that I will be a crown princess in the future, and that the crown prince will marry me after he has accomplished some feats. I have liked him for so long, but now, I have been dreaming for many years. It's empty, how can you tell me to endure it? Xiaoyu yawned and hit her mercilessly, in front of power and fame and fortune, what are your thoughts? Even she was invited into the capital because she had enough chips in her hand? If she said yes, or if it wasn't the monarch's order, she would have to run and break her legs. Sun Ruaoyi, Sun Ruaoyi, a flower growing in a greenhouse should find a man who is willing to take care of the flower patiently. Qi Lianjai had no heart at all, and Xiaoyu thought it was ridiculous that noble ladies in the capital liked his delicate beauty skin. Sun Ruaoyi would not bring benefits to Qi Lianjai at all, and naturally he was not worthy of the position of crown princess. Besides, she should not know at all whether she likes the identity of the prince or the prince himself. Xiaoyu raised an eyebrow. Brother Qing, see a visitor out. Brother Qing wore a long cyan coat and walked in front of Sun Ruaoyi, with one hand lying on her arm and sending her out of the hospital with the other. The pink skirt was like ripples on the water, but her feet suddenly stopped. The sun in the afternoon has gradually moved westward, the willow trees are green, and the blue sky is dotted with floating clouds. Before Xiaoyu entered the house, she looked up at the bright sun, but suddenly heard the woman's voice screaming out, I am biased. Fight! Under the shadow of the ancient trees in front of the door, a flock of frightened birds flew out of the woods. Sun Ruaoyi's eyes shed a line of clear tears. She looked back at Xiaoyu and said stubbornly, this is not fair. Immediately, the pink clothes flew away like a butterfly flapping its wings. Xiaoyu ignored her and said nothing to her innocent words. The accident reached Xiaoyu's ears at night. At that time, Qi Lianjai had just returned to the prince's mansion and summoned Xiaoyu at night. Xiaoyu was practicing swordsmanship in the courtyard. Xia Ruyi and Xia Abeo followed her, and Xia Abeo whispered on the way to the main courtyard. Said to her, Master, Sun Ruaoyi is dead. Xiaoyun raised her eyebrows abruptly, kept her steps on her feet, and asked again, what? My lord, Sun Ruaoyi is dead. The wind at night was as cool as water, and the flowers in the pond were blooming brightly. She glanced a few times when she passed the flower pond. Now, she retracted her gaze and murmured involuntarily, Qi Lianjai, that's ruthless. The breeze was blowing, but for some reason, her face suddenly burned. Entering the main courtyard, Tokugawa motioned Abeo and Ruyi to stay at the door, and led Xiaoyu to the door alone. The courtyard was brightly lit, and he walked through the hand porch and entered the house, and Tokugawa led the order to retreat. Xiaoyu entered the door and walked to the study. There were only a few guards and maids. Seeing her, he took the initiative to lead the way. The room was quiet, only the smell of pine quietly spread. Go straight and walking down the porch, the man in black suddenly propped up the window. Maybe he saw her. Xiaoyu was standing in front of the door, only a wall away from him. Hearing this, he looked in the window subconsciously. There was a pen, ink, paper, and inkstone on it. The man seemed to be painting. After he set up the window, he turned around and walked towards the desk. Have you heard? The matter of Jinjinj Gongfu. Xiaoyu put her fingertips around her pigtails and leaned in front of the case. The case was large, and the woman was 2 steps away from him. She said lightly, I heard that she couldn't understand it herself. I had to fight, planned a bunch of stupid things, and finally made myself stupid. This is indeed the truth. The best solution at present is for Sun Ruaoyi to die inexplicably, so that no noble family dares to act rashly. Although Xiaoyu is a little worthless for Sun Ruaoyi in private, the interests are conflicting, and life and death are not up to her to decide. Qi Lianjai said without emotion. The woman was wearing a navy blue dark patterned straight cloth skirt, with convenient dark green trousers pressed underneath. Hearing that, she put down the braid in her hand. She picked up the ink stick and began to grind it slowly. Are you sure about the Ping Zhou case? The man asked suddenly. Xiaoyu's eyes flashed with a faint color, like a poisonous snake waiting for an opportunity to prey, making people feel cold and stingy. Li Junru is not innocent. Li Junru was the prefect of Pingzhou, but after listening to the woman's words, Qi Lianjai knew that she was confident. He continued to write and draw, as if he had just asked her to grind ink for him. Xiaoyu calmly observed his expression, but that face was always expressionless, and she consciously retracted her gaze before he looked at it. The case of the flood in Pingzhou, this is the evidence presented by the Ministry of Housing and the Ministry of Industry. You may be able to use it when you come to Pingzhou to compare it. Xiaoyu's slender fingertips were a bit soft under the candlelight, and she took the book that he handed over and took it back. Qi Lianjai's eyes darkened, and he rolled up the ink that he had just finished and gave it to Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu glanced lightly, but did not intend to see the paintings inside. She took the painting in her hand, but the man hadn't let go. After the completion of the matter, what Xie wants, feel free to mention. If you have a crush on someone's good man, you can marry him. The woman's eyes lifted immediately, and she replied, Your Highness, the women in Sibei are not greedy for the power in the capital. In other words, she didn't hesitate to ask for it. She tapped boldly on his hand holding the scroll, and said, You have to know that what a minister is doing is his loyalty. Qi Lianjai chuckled lightly and loosened the scroll. You are brave enough to beat Gu. You have to be kind. He looked at the figure of the woman disappearing into the room, and subconsciously chased her back from Ji Zhe's window. The man turned the big wrench on his hand unconsciously, and after a long time, the corners of his lips lifted slightly. The author has something to say. After returning to the yard, Xiaoyu put the painting that Qi Lianjai gave her on the bookshelf, while she picked up the evidence of the flood in Pingzhou and looked at it. The candle light was deep. Xie Ruyi and Xie Abeo went back to rest early in the morning. The whole courtyard was empty, the wind blew through the curtains in the courtyard, the atmosphere was quiet and soft. On the second day, the three of them dressed neatly and kept their whereabouts secret, and completely left this floating paradise. The sun and the moon have traveled and the stars have moved, and the three finally arrived in Pingzhou at the end of August. Pingzhou is located in the south of the Yangtze River. Since the founding of the People's Republic of China, it has been a place for fireworks and dances. The brothel here is more famous than the Yinglu in Tianjin. This day was bleak and the rain was cold. Maybe after running around for a long time, the horse's four hooves stomped excitedly just after entering the city, attracting the frequent glances of few pedestrians. Call master, can you find an inn to stay in first? Xie Ruyi asked Lima. Go, take a rest today, and go to New Moon Mansion tomorrow. Xiaoyu found the familiar Hongchen Inn in the west of the city and handed him the token. The shopkeeper was a plump, half-old MILF. When he first saw the three of them, his eyes rolled, and Hobai's wrist moved from the abacus. Kai took the token presented by Xiaoyu, and immediately restrained his expression. The name of Tianzi is reserved. You can go up there. The shopkeeper is the proprietress of the Pingzhou Hongchen Inn, codenamed Yuniang. At this moment, she lowered her voice calmly and handed the three of them a small mahogany key. Saw the arrival of the three. Xiaoyu came to the Tianzihao door, opened the outermost key cover, twisted the wooden tenon made of black wood, and then picked up the mahogany key to open the door. With a click, the door opened slowly. We don't have an official identity, so it's not easy to investigate this case. Xiaoyu frowned and looked at the pedestrians on the street through the window. The rain was still falling, the whole sky was grey, and when the autumn wind blew, even the house was cold and damp. The main reason for the flood in Pingzhou was that the local officials embezzled money for the project, and most of the dam materials were shoddy. The cause of the incident on the bright side had already been investigated by Qi Lianjai. The key was to investigate the evidence that Wang Yu colluded with officials and murdered officials, which had been carefully concealed. This was the most difficult thing. Would you like to borrow a convenience from New Moon Mansion? New Moon Mansion is the business of Chiao family village. Chiao family has always been on good terms with the government. It is not impossible for us to ask Mr. Chiao to help with this. The owner of Qiajiazhuang village, Mr. Chiao, was the previous leader of the Martial Arts Alliance. After getting married and starting a business, he voluntarily retired and established Qiajiazhuang. He began to do business with the people of Jianghu and the common people. He became a good citizen who eats black and white. They have frequent contacts with the government, and they are clearer about the movements of the court than many people in the rivers and lakes. The New Moon Mansion is a brothel opened by Qiajiazhuang in Pingzhou. The brothel has been a gathering place for intelligence since ancient times. Therefore, Xia Yu wanted to go to the New Moon Mansion to inquire. Xia Abao and Xia Ruyi were thinking on the same channel. They were sitting on the low couch with their swords in their arms. One was tall and the other was short. After taking off the masks, both of them turned into men. Martial arts can't really help Xia Yu in this regard. It's not feasible. Chiao's family is now the master of Chiao's family. Chiao Qingyun and Chiao's father went out for a tour a few years ago and has not returned. Chiao's family may not be willing to make it easy for us, and if this Chiao's family is also with Wang Yu, if there is collusion, our trip will be in vain. Besides, there is no need to use people who are suspicious, and there is no need to use people. Xia Yu was sitting on the round stool of the Eight Immortals table. She threw a walnut in her hand, and threw it into the air again and again, and caught it again and again, as if she was thinking about something. The atmosphere in the room suddenly sank. Since Li Junru, the prefect of Pingzhou, hanged himself after he was found to have written a confession, his body has never been buried. Logically speaking, after a person dies, if Wang Yu wants to destroy the corpse, he should directly ask someone to bury the corpse. Why don't you bury it? Xia Yu's eyes turned slightly, and the walnut in her hand was rubbed by her, remembering the note that Xia Ruyi and Xia Abao handed her in the prince's mansion before, and asked Yuniang, I heard that Pingzhou after the death of Li Junru, the prefect, his wife in the main room was anxious to renew her son. This matter is not a secret in the whole of Pingzhou, not to mention that the lady specially selected the daughter of the powerful family to hand over the invitation, as if her son was so precious, but all the officials and eunuchs in Pingzhou city rejected her. I heard that she has been mad for 2 days because of this. Yun Niang nodded slightly, without concealing it. His son is not of good character. He is spoiled by Li Junru's wife, who is not diligent, does not distinguish between grains, has a fat head and big ears, and does not know a few characters. Instead, he likes to hang around in the fireworks field. The concubine in his backyard was pissed. That's fine. Xia Yu poured a few cups of tea slowly, first pushed it to Yuniang, then to Xia Ruyi, Xia Abao, and finally put it in front of her. In the past 2 days, you have spread the news that Xia Qiagong's daughter is living in Pingzhou and is lonely. That Mrs. Li is worried about her son. She will definitely not let this kind of news of a noble girl come to her door. Yuniang was slightly surprised by Xia Yu's decision while holding the hot tea in her hand. In her impression, the Lord had never risked his life whether it was a conspiracy or conspiracy, but now this move made her unable to see clearly. The tea mist rose up, covering Xia Yu's expression more and more unpredictable. She was dressed in black and sat quietly at the table, and several people felt a strong sense of oppression. In fact, Xia Yu herself seldom used the power of the Lord's order. Most of the tricks could be solved with ingenuity when she was walking in the rivers and lakes, but now she is also a half-official family, and she can't always pull her brothers to do hard work for her own interests. Human relationships are all debts. Although no one dares to obey the Lord's order, but those in power must cherish this kind of power. The back of the heart determines the success or failure of things, and Xia Yu doesn't want to do those things that affect others. Most difficulties gritting his teeth, he carried it over. She had an idea in her heart, and the whole person relaxed a lot. As the rainfall decreased, the floating population in Pingzhou increased rapidly, and the comings and goings were very lively. The news spread as expected in the past few days. In the past 2 days, Xie Ruyi and Xie Abao always dressed up as men and went to the largest brothel in Pingzhou Crescent Moon Mansion to inquire about the news. At night, Xie Yu covered her face with a black cloth and was dressed in black night clothes. She had various hidden weapons hidden in her waist. She jumped down from the 3rd floor of the Hongchen Inn and tapped her toes to the eaves on the opposite corner of the street. At night, the curfew in Pingzhou is not as strict as that in Genjing. There are only a few soldiers patrolling the streets, and the uniform steps are occasionally in the layout of the streets. Xie Yu jumped above the eaves. She was very light, and the place where she landed was as silent as stepping on cotton. The black figure was high or low, and the afterimages flew under the moon. The appointment of the prefect of the Great Qi dynasty is usually directly appointed by the emperor, or by the local governor. After Li Junru's death, this position is still vacant. Logically speaking, we should first directly suspect that Li Junru committed suicide, and secondly suspect that the local governor is fighting for power and profit. However, Qi Lianjai designated Wang Yu to initiate this case, so she naturally began to investigate where Wang Yu could reach. "Lord, look!" Xie Yu was hanging on the eaves, but when he noticed someone, he gently climbed on the beam and walked inside. There were a lot of ice cubes in the pitch-dark torture room, and the temperature dropped sharply as soon as you entered the door. At this time, only a half-lit candle was placed on the candlestick, changing positions as the two walked. The candles were dimly lit, and the two of them obviously returned suddenly after setting the value. The prisoner carefully opened Li Junru's blackened esophagus and throat. The prisoner who spoke had a grim expression and exchanged glances with the older boss beside him. The two of them tacitly exited the torture room and blew the light before they started. Whisper. Xie Yu used his inner strength, stepped lightly on the shadow behind the door pillar, and recorded the words of the two in his mind exactly. Master Li obviously died of poisoning. Why did the people above say that he committed suicide? The point is that since he committed suicide, why is he still keeping such a big handle on his body? It stands to reason that this kind of evidence should be completely destroyed. Xiao Gao, I'm afraid this matter is very involved. If you and I still want a future, don't worry about it. The old man sighed and parted ways with the young man. Xie Yu's thoughts moved, since the corpse has not been destroyed so far, and the corpse spots are still left, that is, there is something hidden on the corpse of this Lord Li. After the young man left, Xie Yu squatted in the dark, opened the curtain and entered the torture chamber. The dim yellow candles flickered faintly in the torture chamber, and a thin black figure stood in front of the corpse, as if fiddling with something, but the figure fiddled for a while, and then covered it with a white cloth, and then the figure flashed, and she disappeared again. In the room. Strangeness. Xie Yu didn't find anything on Li Junru's body. Her eyes flashed. She left the figure of the Yamen far behind, and continued to climb over the house and over the wall to Li Junru's house. In the past few days, the Li mansion has been under increasing martial law. Under Mrs. Li's advice, the guards guarding the yard are equipped with a guard dog. From a distance, it looks like the official guards are patrolling. Xie Yu pondered for a while in his heart, and felt that he couldn't find anything in Li's house at night, so he simply turned around and returned to the Hongchen Inn. As soon as she put on her regular clothes, Xie Ruyi heard the news of the first floor. She had a natural ear, and at this moment, she stood up with a gloomy expression. "My lord, someone is making trouble." The heavy night gave Pingzhou City a magnificent coat, and the city was still singing and dancing peacefully. It seemed that the lives of the people in the city were not disturbed by anyone. However, the turmoil was so sudden, Xie Yu's brown eyes turned black, and her fingers were pinched between her fingers. Holding the wine glass, he chuckled lightly, but the smile didn't reach the bottom of his eyes, which made people chill. The author has something to say, overhaul. But after a while, Yun Niang carefully knocked on the door. "Master, it's the attendant of Li's house. He's pretending to be a local ruffian to make trouble." I'm afraid I found someone to find out the truth when I found out that Xie Qiagong's daughter was in the Hongchen Inn. Xie Abao sat on the soft couch and raised his eyebrows. Xie Yu chuckled, the fish is hooked, change clothes and go downstairs. The three of them are not like masters and servants. There are no rules for sitting, standing, and lying down. Anyone who is tired can sit for a while, and whoever thinks of walking around can do whatever they want. Maid skirt. The two loosened their muscles. I haven't worn such loose clothes for many years, it's not easy to move around. We're going to act now, we have to pretend to be real. The two were bickering on the side, and after seeing Xie Yu finished changing clothes, they immediately stopped. Xie Yu was wearing a white RU skirt with a navy blue robe wrapped around it, 2 dark hairpins hanging from her earlobes, and a white veil covering her face, and then she was soft and weak. Walked out the door dignified and graceful. See, let's learn. Xie Abao scolded Xie Ruyi, Ruyi snorted coldly, and immediately ran out of the door in small steps in the next second, supporting Xie Yu with one hand. After the trio was rectified, they were sent on the spot. It was night, and there were not many people on the first floor, but because the minions of the Li residence were making trouble just now, they forced a circle of people to watch in front of the inn. The culprit was blocking in front of the inn, and Xie Yu passed through the crowd and shuttled in the lobby like a fish, abruptly brightening the lobby on the first floor. The pawns of the merchants who were eating all looked at Xie Yu and the three of them while chewing peanuts. Grandmas, where did such a fairy come from? You don't know, this is what has been rumored these days, that Xie Qiagong's daughter. Why did she come to Pingzhou City alone? The girl's family is so handsome, she is not afraid of being abducted. Although Xie Yu had her face covered, everyone felt that this woman was 10 stunners from her temperament, and they were even more surprised. Hey, don't tell me, that Li Mansion is not. Xie Yu pretended not to see the onlookers in front of the inn, so he would drill out through the gap in the door. Yun Niang saw that the person who cheated at the door had their eyes straight, so she immediately made a gesture to Xiao Er, who walked to the door and seemed to say something inadvertently. Xie Qiagong's daughter is not bad, she has such a temperament. The figure is not bad either. Only then did the man at the door react. He opened the crowd of onlookers, and immediately rushed towards Xie Yu and the others. Xie Abao pretended to turn around inadvertently, and pretended to be surprised to protect the two behind him. What are you doing? Don't touch Our Lady! Xie Abao and Xie Ruyi looked like they were protecting the calf, and Xie Yu even pretended to retreat back. Humph, little beauty, come to my brother's arms. The rogue smiled sinisterly, and a group of black-clothed guards suddenly appeared out of nowhere, knocking them out and taking them away. This act of bullying men and women, but the strange thing is that no one reported to the officials. Everyone is ordinary people. They are used to this kind of thing, and no one wants to cause trouble. More importantly, most of the people watching today he only came after he had been given the money, because he kept it secret, and the people of Li's house obediently fell into the trap. Things went unbelievably well. The three were knocked unconscious and placed on a carriage. There were no candles in the carriage, and the space was small and crowded. The three of them could almost immediately notice when they moved. When they noticed that they were approaching, Xie Yu opened his eyes first and communicated with the two of them. Pissed. After entering the house, the two of you will meet me in secret first. Xie Yu motioned to the two of them, and the big man outside the curtain saw the place, and immediately opened the curtain and dragged the three of them away half dead. Xie Yu realized that she and the two were separated, and when she turned around, she peeked at the direction where the two were sent. The maid in the house moved gently and carried her to the bed to rest. When the maid came out of the room and realized that there was no one in the room, Xie Yu immediately opened her eyes. The room was decorated in an antique style, and the other party probably did not suspect her identity. There were only a few guards outside the door. The furnishings in this room should be that of Mrs. Li's bedroom. Sure enough, after another half an hour, a group of noisy footsteps approached the room, Xiaoyu immediately returned to the previous posture and waited for them to come in. When the leading lady casually said to the people behind her, "Come on down and close the door tightly," Xiaoyu pretended that she had just woken up and got up in a daze. "Where is this? This is Li's house and your future home." The woman was wearing a purple-toned slim-fit fishtail dress. When she spoke, her voice was charming and moving. She had a beautiful face and raised eyebrows. Wei Wei understands, no wonder he can get used to his son like this. "What are you talking about? Why can't I understand it?" Xiaoyu shrunk beside the bed, like a frightened rabbit, hugging her tightly. Mrs. Li was very satisfied when she saw her being so cowardly. Since she was born from a noble woman and worthy of her son, she was soft and cowardly. "Good luck." She sat on the round stool beside the 8 immortals table and observed Xiaoyu's expression from a distance of about a few steps. Mrs. Li shook the round fan and stood up gracefully again. "In the future, you will be the daughter-in-law of my Li family, and I will be your mother-in-law. Don't even think about escaping when you are here." "Xiekuagong, we have all inquired about it, in the remote Sibei, even if you are now spread the word, and your parents won't come to rescue you. It's better to marry our Li family obediently. After a year and a half, you will have a big fat boy, a girl is fine, and then we will give you another grace to let you go home to visit relatives." She walked slowly and leisurely in front of the stained window, her tone full of arrogance. "If you are not obedient, then we will always have a way to make you obedient. Like the collection of herbs on the market, the jade girl will burn herself after eating it. But if you are obedient, our Li family will not treat you badly. Our Li family will not treat you badly. The person in charge of the mansion is currently me. I can't say how rich and powerful the king is, but it's still much better than your wild land in Sibei." Xiaoyu sneered inwardly, pinched her thighs secretly, her eyes flushed immediately, and she said tremblingly, "I'm obedient." Mrs. Li didn't expect her to agree so quickly, fanned the fan in surprise and paced out. "Since that's the case, just stay in the room for the past 2 days. The day after tomorrow, the two of you will get married. I'll see you when I'm free." To say why Mrs. Li cares so much about her background, it is because she has a heart for her own background. She was originally a famous prostitute in a brothel, and then she married Li Junru to redeem her life and lived a good life. She is used to seeing those pickles in the mud as a matter of fact. She just wanted her son to find a noble girl with a noble character. Immediately after she left, a maid entered the door to guard her. Xiaoyu falsely said that she wanted to rest, and the whole room fell into darkness. The maid was at the door. Xiaoyu lay on the bed and waited for the two to come to him. After half an hour, Xie Ruyi and Xie Abao hung upside down on the eaves and entered the house without knowing it. "Master, we found out the location of the study, but there are all guards there, and it is a bit difficult to climb in the dark. It stands to reason that Li Junru is dead, and there should be nothing important in the study, but Mrs. Li stays in the study all day, as if there is gold hidden in it. Mainly there are dogs. Their sense of smell is too keen, and they bark when there is a slight disturbance. Get on the drug." Xie Ruyi reminded Xie Abao to stuff the powder in his hand into Xie Abao's waist. The 3 figures flashed, and they all hid in the dense trees. The guards of the Li mansion were so strict after Li Junru died. "I think that Mrs. Li must know something." Xiaoyu squatted on the sturdy branch, touched his chin, and reminded, "I suspect that Li Junru was instigated by Wang Yu during his lifetime, and Mrs. Li also knows about this. Besides, there must be something hidden in this study." Mrs. Li was afraid that she would follow in Li Junru's footsteps, so she set up a lot of guards. Xie Ruyi and Xie Abao nodded again and again. Xiaoyu continued, "The guards of the study are guarded by 4 guards in turn. Each guard is assigned a hunting dog, but there are only 2 guards in other places. The day after tomorrow, Mrs. Li will arrange my and her son's wedding. Let's find out about the study tonight. In other places, go to the study tomorrow and night." After explaining the task clearly, the three of them suddenly fell like leaves in the wind, lightly tapped the trunk of the tree, and sneaked into the black eaves with Jueshan Qing Gong. The Crown Prince's cold symptoms have been committed again, and he has been resting for the past 2 days without going to court. Humph, 1 or 2 of their Qi family are sick, the old is in a coma, the minor is cold, and they simply abdicate. This emperor of the great Qi dynasty has done me well. The person who said this was Wang Yu, the biggest courtier of the dynasty. He was almost in his 60th year, but he was full of energy when he said this. At this time, he was wearing a loose dark purple training robe and was practicing boxing in the back mountain. He didn't have any scruples when he said this, and the servant on the side continued to compliment him, which made Wang Yu feel a little more at ease, as if he suddenly thought of something. He put his hands behind his back, and his eyes were squinting. The attendant next to him asked, "Then the Xie family, has there been any trouble recently?" The attendant hesitated for a while after hearing the words, "Our dark pile has been smashed for many days." Wang Yu doesn't care about a few dispensable hidden piles. He has harassed the court for many years, and he has collected money and silk everywhere. Now he is afraid that the money in the national treasury is not as much as his pockets. "Let her smash it." She and her 2 guards are jumping around under our noses, it's better than going outside and making black hands. This Xie family's patriarch will make some small disturbances 3 days after entering the capital, seems to have a very clear understanding of their hidden stakes. Wang Yu rolled his eyes, grabbed his waist and waved his hand, "Go, check me if there is any ghost." At this time, the night wind was blowing, and the grass in the backyard was swiped. Wang Yu looked at it from the railing, and still felt strange in his heart. Saibei's spies blew Xia Yu into a state of mind. She couldn't be so silent when she arrived in Genjing. "Check, let me check her whereabouts and see if she is still in the prince's mansion." His subordinates took the order and withdrew from his surroundings. The old man stroked the beard on his chin again and again, feeling uneasy in his heart. The author has something to say. Overhaul. Ping's whose matter about Xie Qiagong's daughter did not reach the capital, nor did it reach Wang Yu's ears. Xia Yu and the 3 were trying their best to find all suspicious clues in Li Mansion. Yesterday evening, after the 3 split up, they searched the Li residence separately, and what they found was surprising. "Have you found something?" Xia Yu asked the 2 of them, and she expected to see Xie Ruyi and Xie Abao shaking their heads together. "The 2 of us turned over the Li Mansion, and we didn't find anything that could be done, but there is this one." Xie Ruyi spread out her white hand, and in the palm of her hand was a small wooden box about high. Xie Abao's eyes narrowed. "I just found one too, but I didn't take it out." Xie Ruyi shook his head gently. "I can find this box because I can hear movement inside." At this time, on the tip of the moon, it was so quiet that only the patrols of the guards in the courtyard could be heard. Xia Yu stared at the box, her eyes narrowed. She bit her index finger, squeezed out a bead of blood, and placed it very close to the small square box. "Listen again." Xie Ruyi stretched out her ears and approached the box, her expression instantly grim. "There's something inside, don't open it yet. It's moving much louder than before, I can hear it without getting close." Xia Yu's expression changed, and he whispered, "Miao Zhang blood." Xie Ruyi and Xie Abao also remembered the not so good memories of the past. Miao Zhang blood goo is a kind of child mother goo. Once it occurs, it will be like 10,000 worms, and the liver and gallbladder will be torn apart. There are so many blood goo in the Li residence, and you don't need to think about it. Miao Zhang blood goo was mostly used for the training of dead soldiers. Back then, Xie Ruyi and Xie Abao were both daughters of the Xie family. In order to cultivate dead soldiers loyal to Xie Yu in the Xie clan, the elders in the clan once released blood goo and a bunch of goo insects to all the children of the side branch, just to select 1 or 2 superior dead seedlings. At the back, siblings killed each other, sisters fought each other, and the family fell apart. Xie Ruyi and Xie Abao experienced the most sinister people and stood out, and everything was for the head of the Xie family, the one who sat high on the throne of the Xie family. But as a child of the Xie family, Xiaoyu suffered only more than them, not less than them, which is why the two were willing to follow Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu's eyes flashed lightly. Let's look for it after dark, there must be something in the study. In connection with the body of Li Junru in the torture room yesterday, Xiaoyu had probably guessed Wang Yu's hands and feet. The mother worm of this blood worm was placed on Wang Yu's body, so the cause of Li Junru's death that day was not suicide at all, nor was it as they said. For poisoning. It was Ziaigu that got out of control and ran out of Li Junru's body. The imbalance of qi and blood in Li Junru's 5 viscera and lungs directly caused the stasis of the meridians in the neck, so it looked like he had hanged himself. Then the evidence is in the study, but what's in the study? Are these evidences correspondence, or something else? Several questions passed through Xiaoyu's mind quietly, but one question after another suddenly made her understand that this time the Pingzhou flood case could not root out Wang Yu's influence in the court. Searching for evidence is not as good as pulling out Wang Yu's minions. So what they're going to do now after going to the study to find the evidence, we have to go to the Yamen. It was already the second day of the day, but still no one paid attention to Xiaoyu's group, except that a few maids suddenly appeared early in the morning to measure her size. Xie Ruyi and Xie Abeo looked at each other, obviously did not follow Xiaoyu's thoughts, looked at her suspiciously. Xiaoyu did not explain too much. The yellow-clothed maid outside the door seemed to be aware of the movement, her pace moved slightly, and she was walking towards her. When they came inside, Xie Ruyi and Xie Abeo flashed and hid on the beam. "What's the matter with you, young lady?" The maid was short and looked at Xiaoyu timidly. Xiaoyu whispered, "Never, I want to sleep for a while, you can rest." Although the maid was timid, she looked at the bright sky outside and glanced at her suspiciously, but she still obediently went outside to guard. Li Junru's eldest son, Li Ji, who is well known in all Pingzhou as an almighty waste-wood, heard that his newly married daughter-in-law was locked in the side courtyard, and immediately closed the fan and went to the side courtyard. He had a round belly, and he couldn't stop leaning back when walking, the fat on his face couldn't stop trembling. His eyes were like 2 rice grains, and when he laughed, there was only one slit left in his eyes. Behind him the servant boy rushed out and drove out the maid who was guarding the door. "Where is this young master's daughter-in-law?" As soon as he opened his mouth, he saw a beautiful woman wearing a blue apron sitting in the room. When he saw him coming in, he seemed startled, his eyes immediately turned red, and he got up and took 2 steps back. "Little beauty, I'm your husband, call your husband to listen, ah ha 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 ha." The man used the fan to gently lift the woman's chin. Xiaoyu lifted her chin up in coordination, and said coyly, "Husband." Xie Ruyi and Xie Abeo, who were squatting on the eaves, could smell the stench of sweat and powder from Fatty's body from far away. At this moment, when they heard their master endure the burden of humiliation, he shouted out a charming voice of husband, and immediately wanted to kill the fatty. Exhale. Xie Ruyi only moved slightly, and just happened to hear a piercing voice coming from the box hidden at his waist, indicating that the goo insect was impatiently rushing out. Li Yun originally only came to see her, but he didn't plan what to do. Seeing that she was well behaved, he immediately laughed a few times and went out the door. The smell of fat powder in the room dissipated immediately, and Xiaoyu subconsciously wanted to find a gong bucket to vomit, but saw his 2 servants fluttering to the ground with solemn expressions. "Master," this goo-worm reacted to Li Ji. Xiaoyu frowned when she heard the words, but footsteps came from the door. The 2 retreated to the shadows again. This time, it was Mrs. Li, who had changed into a white floral straight dress that was cleaned up, and a red gemstone belt perfectly outlined the waistline. "Have you seen your husband? When the wedding night is over, I will show you the Li mansion. Your father-in-law was a kind person before his death. It will be fun to see you and your husband getting married." Mrs. Li just sat down and said a few persuasive words, just like going through the motions. This attitude made Xiaoyu feel more and more confusing. At present, They don't know anything about Li's house, and they haven't even obtained the most basic information. Xiaoyu put his teeth on the back, and then he knew that he was acting recklessly. Master, this goo insect only reacts to Li Ji. In general, child and mother goo, in addition to the reaction between the child goo and the mother goo, there will also be a reaction between the child goo. Tonight we will find all the boxes, and I love to see the specific situation after entering the study. The two of them should have been kept in the firewood room, so the two secretly returned to the same way. At night, the Li mansion was much quieter. Xiaobao took advantage of Mrs. Li's turn to cut the window grills, jumped off the eaves and put a small packet of medicinal powder into the tea. After seeing her drink it with his own eyes, the three of them walked straight to the study. There were dog barks along the way. Xiaoyu pulled the two of them up the tree, just avoiding a group of guards. Have you entered Li Ji's yard to check it out in the past 2 days? I've been in, but he's doing everything as usual, sleeping like a pig. Are you sure it's him? Both of them were hesitant now. After all, no one doubted Li Ji's identity at that time. Everyone thought that he was a waste and would not interfere with the big plan at all. Xiaoyu raised her eyebrows. Don't worry, if he's not in his yard, he's in the study. If Mrs. Li was the real ruler of the Li family, then the whole child and mother goo should be placed on Mrs. Li's body, but now that the worm appeared on Li Ji's body, things became more and more interesting. The woman touched her chin playfully and said, Wang Yu, this old dog, is really interesting. The autumn night sky showed a cloudy blue with a black air, and the moon showed a little silver light falling on the pavilion. Xiaoyu stared at the enclosed study and took a deep breath. Rush! Xiaobao sprinkled 3 whole packets of tasteless powder on the 3 of them. It is not difficult to break into the study, the key is how to break in secretly. With Xiaoyu's usual behavior like a gangster, he may have knocked out a few guards and turned in, but not now. I saw the shadow of an ancient branch swaying in the exquisite and grand courtyard, and the second group of guards couldn't help but stop. What's wrong with this tree? The guards were all wearing black cloth shirts. The guard with the dog behind him saw that the dog was not moving, and immediately said with confidence, It's all right, brother, look, the dog didn't bark. Fuck off. Hey, the guard had sharp eyes, picked up the big bag of silver quickly, and then squinted and held it in front of the captain of the guard. The captain of the guard thought that this newcomer would not give him face, but when he saw the twists and turns, the sharp light in his eyes softened. A lot. Smart. They took out a few taels of silver from the money bag and swiped it at Wei. The two continued to lead the team forward, but because everyone stopped by the tree, no one noticed that 3 shadows silently leaped forward. Room. Prince, there is news from the palace. Huo Shaijun stood aside and handed the note in his hand to Qi Lianjai. The man put on a big coat and fox fur early in the autumn rain. At this time, the thick fluff was wrapped around his neck, which made the man's face even worse. Exquisite. My father's condition is getting worse again. Qi Lianjai glanced at it, then turned his hand and burned the note with candles. The dim yellow light flickered, and the man's deep black pupils were confused. Unable to suppress the cough in his throat, he closed his eyes and leaned back on the chair with tired eyes. Tell Xiaoyu to speed up. After she finishes the case in Pingzhou, let her return to Beijing immediately. The capital is getting more and more unsafe now. Wang Yu's people have been thinking about Anjin's house over and over again. They probably sensed Xiaoyu's movements. The candle was dimly lit, and Huo Shaijun exited the study wisely. The author has something to say. Xiaoyu is such a clever little devil. Li's study is very big, but there is no one in the room. On the wall of the study is a long scroll of pictures of ladies in yellow leather. On the wall facing the door is a bookshelf. In the middle is a mahogany desk table and a taishi chair. The 4 treasures of the study are scattered on the desk. A black shadow fell quietly and walked gently towards the white figure who broke in at will. The short blade in his hand was about to stab the woman's neck. Click. Xiaoyu turned his palm into a soft hand, and slapped it on the chest of the dark guard in a flash of lightning, killing him with one blow. The sound of bone cracking sounded softly, the dark guard's eyes were rounded, and he fell straight back. Xie came out of the shadows, quietly took the dark guard's body, and hung him on the beam. Xie Abao resolved all the other two secret guards hidden in the dark. The three of them looked at each other and started to rummage against the wall. Generally, there are secret doors and dark rooms hidden in the mansions of officials. There is no one in the study, but it does not mean that there is no one in the dark room. After rummaging through all the bookshelves in the study, there is no substantial evidence. Xiaoyu moved slightly and turned a porcelain vase placed in the second column on the third floor on the bookshelf slightly. It was also the only blue and white porcelain on the entire bookshelf. A pair of pictures of ladies hanging on the wall suddenly and slowly put away, the wall behind the pictures of ladies slowly turned, and a tunnel appeared silently. The more you go inside, the more you can hear the voice inside. Li Junru is dead, but he and Wang Yu's correspondence and accounting credentials are all in my hands. I don't believe that Wang Yu really dares to tear his face with me. But Wang Yu gave you a mother-in-law gu, once this thing happens, I'm afraid it won't be very good. Although Miaozhong blood gu is powerful, it is not without a solution. Tomorrow I will plant the other gu I prepared on the daughter of Xie Qiuagong. Behind Xie Qiuagong is the Sai Bei Xie family. Thank you the power of the family. I don't believe that there is no way to solve the blood poison. It happens that I and her husband and wife are one. Since Xie Qiuagong wants to save his daughter, he will naturally save my son-in-law. Xiaoyu frowned. It turned out that this was the reason why the Li family wanted to marry a noble girl, but this method was so stupid that Xiaoyu didn't even know what to complain about Li Yi. Moreover, no matter how much evidence you have in your hands, as long as you are killed, no one will know what Wang Yu and Li Junru are doing. How can this Li Ji say he dare not kill me with such confidence? Or, Li Ji didn't even know that he was planted with blood poison? Looking at it like this, I'm afraid that Li Yun is also one of the murderers who killed Li Junru, then the relationship between Li Yun and Li Junru is somewhat dramatic. Xiaoyu thought to himself. The three cats could see the dim yellow candlelight from a distance in the tunnel, and there were two voices talking, one of them was Li Ji, and the other should be Li Ji's confidant. Cha Li Yun was originally sorting out the correspondence between Li Junru and Wang Yu with his back to his confidant. Unexpectedly, a strange voice came, but when he turned around, he only saw his confidant lying on the ground. Cai Tong. Li Yun was startled, and hurriedly reached for the man who fell to the ground, but the man's eyes were closed, his face was pale, and he looked like he was out of breath. Cai Tong, his shouting stopped abruptly, and then he lay down on Cai Tong's body softly. The room was dark and quiet, with only the cold voice of a woman. Xiaoyu retracted his hand and glanced at the pile of neatly arranged letters and account books in the secret room. Behind him, Xie Ruyi and Xie Abao had already begun to collect evidence. Take all these things away. After leaving the Li mansion smoothly, the three of them rushed to the Hongchen Inn by touching the night. Yuniang, who was responding, brought the horses in advance, and the three of them rushed back to the capital. Along the way, Xiaoyu didn't rush to see Qi Lianjai when he returned to the prince's mansion. He handed all the evidence and the bloodworm into Huo Shaijun's hands, and immediately took his attendant to sleep in the dark. On the second day, it was just dawn, and after the fog had dissipated, Xiaoyu felt that her exhaustion had been washed off by the step bed, and she immediately put on a white bunt and practiced the sword lightly. Yo Miss Xiet, you are back. Yesterday, when eunuch Tokugawa went to the palace to deliver some tranquilizers to the empress, he happened not to touch Xiaoyu, and the people below didn't tell him. If he hadn't passed by Yulan courtyard this morning and saw that there was movement inside, I know these masters are back. Father Tokugawa, what are you doing here? Xiaoyu carried the sword behind her back, and asked a question. She didn't have time to braid her hair this morning. She only had her hair loose. When she was in Pingzhou, in order to dress up as a virtuous and dignified lady, she even tied one casually. The lady's hairstyle made her very uncomfortable. A crescent-shaped smile appeared on Tokugawa's face, and he bent down and said, "Bring some food to the prince." He grew up watching the prince, and his relationship with the prince is not that of master and servant, but rather the attitude of a loving elder to the younger generation. Qi Lianjai has always respected him. In terms of status, Tokugawa is only afraid that she is better than her and the younger generation. Huo Shijun's status is much higher. "Miss Yat, would you like to eat some together?" Xiaoyu immediately shook his head. No, father-in-law, I'm afraid that the crown prince won't be able to bear it." This is true. Besides, the two of them are not too familiar with each other at the moment, and the monarch and ministers have a feast together, which is a lot of attention. Not to mention that when she returned from Pingzhou, the two of them were afraid that they would talk about official business as soon as they met, and they could not be quiet at all. "Come down and eat." After thinking about it, Tokugawa had no choice but to bow to Xiaoyu in a red palace uniform. "Then I won't bother you," the old slave retire. "Father-in-law, walk slowly." Xiaoyu sent her off loudly, and then played her sword vigorously again. She especially likes to practice the sword in the morning or before going to bed at night, so that even if she is tired all day, she will feel that her heart is peaceful. The sky in the morning was a bit bleak, the air was moist and clean. It was now October, the autumn clothes were cool, the time was not short or long, and a layer of fuzzy growth rings was carved for everyone. When the food was delivered to the main courtyard, Qi Lianjai had just washed and had not changed his clothes. He only had a white coat on his upper body, his black hair was slightly combed back to his head, and he took the lunch box along Dechuan's hand. "Master, Miss Xie from Yulan courtyard is back. She got up in the morning and practiced her sword," Tokugawa said in a low voice. Qi Lianjai raised his eyebrows and glanced at him, but didn't say anything, just took the lunch box and put a few side dishes and porridge on the table by himself. There were no maids in the house, so Tokugawa tidied up the table for him again, handed the chopsticks with both hands respectfully. Qi Lianjai took the chopsticks, and his eyes dropped slightly. "Tell her to come over for dinner." "What?" Tokugawa was stunned for a moment, the old face lost its color for the first time, but with his undisguised joy, he didn't wait for Qi Lianjai to speak, he hurriedly said "Hey," and then left in a hurry. When Xiaoyu went to the main courtyard to eat, the whole person was stunned. The man sat quietly in front of the desk, flipping through the papers that had not been reviewed yesterday. Xiaoyu saw the sturdy skin slightly exposed in his shirt. "It's a big old man, how can he be so tender as the pity of Yinglu?" Yinglu is the largest brothel in the capital, and it is one of the industries under Xiaoyu's hands. Miss Liana is Yinglu's #1 card, and with a little glance at the man, all the 7 souls and 6 souls of the person are taken away. The noble prince probably didn't think that he could be compared to a brothel woman, and he never thought that a girl like Xiaoyu could go to such a place, so after hearing the movement, the man raised his head slightly and said, "Sit down." There are already tableware and chopsticks beside him. The chicken porridge and some side dishes made this morning. Xiaoyu went to the taishi chair next to him and made a big one. When Qi Lianjai started, the two sat together to eat in front of the table. Xiaoyu eats quickly, but eats delicately, and can vaguely see the temperament of some noble children. "You came back yesterday?" "Yes, the evidence is with Mr. Huo, and the Pingzhou case can be further investigated. If you are not in a hurry, I want to take it slow." The last few words Xiaoyu bit the tip of her tongue and said it slowly, because it was suspected of dereliction of duty, but there are indeed many things in Pingzhou that have not been dug up. After staying in Pingzhou for 10 days and a half months, I am afraid that Wang Yu will be able to come back. Qi Lianjai just wanted to be sympathetic to her subordinates, who knew she could say so much. He knew the situation in Pingzhou and understood that some things couldn't be rushed, so he nodded. "Don't worry, there have been several banquets in Ganjing these days, and many people have sent you posts. you can pick one and go to one. Feast. Xiaoyu understood that this was the rhythm to use herself to the end. When she came, she only combed her hair on the back of her head, and just after eating, she nodded, leaning on her chin to watch Qi Lianjai eat. Qi Lianjai's every move was engraved with the etiquette of the royal family of the Qi dynasty. At this time, he knew that Xiaoyu was staring at him, but he did not panic. He wiped his mouth with a cloth calmly, and his breakfast was run out. Tokugawa. As soon as he called out, father-in-law Tokugawa quietly brought 2 servants, took the lunch box, turned around, and walked away. Xiaoyu moved the Taishi chair back to its original place. Qi Lianjai looked at her clumsy movements and felt a strange feeling in his heart. You don't need to do these things. Xiaoyu just finished moving, and when she heard the words, she replied, Ah! But your highness, you are going to work, and the servants have already gone out. They'll be back. Qi Lianjai didn't want to talk about these trivial questions, so he changed the topic. Is it going well in Pingzhou? It's okay, it took 3 or 4 days to delay the scene, and it took some effort. Wang Yu planted Miaozhong blood goo on Li Junru, so on the day of the flood, the goo worms broke out, and Li Junru's meridians were blocked and died. Li Junru's wife and outsiders had no matchmaking and gave birth to Li Fu's direct son Li Ji. The handle controlled Li Ji to do things for him, but after Li Ji completed the closing for Wang Yu, he kept all the evidence of Wang Yu and Li Ji's letters. I brought back all the things in Li's study, and I can't find his fault if I don't believe it. The woman gasped for a moment and continued, but Wang Yu's minions in Pingzhou have not been eradicated. These evidences can eradicate some cancers. I want to slowly find out some bugs that are still hiding behind. Qi Lianjai nodded, it's a good job, take a good rest for a few days, and put the rest aside beforehand. Recently, a large number of people from the rivers and lakes have appeared in Qianjing. Some people take advantage of this to make waves and cover up the still deep situation to become more obscure. Seeing this, Xiaoyu bowed to him and exited the study in a proper manner. By the way, have you seen the painting I gave you? The man's voice was gentle, and Xiaoyu was stunned for a moment. The author has something to say. Finally back to the prince's mansion. Recommend the comprehension text of the column, Chong Chong Chong. Painting? What painting? Oh, she remembered that when she didn't leave the prince's mansion 2 months ago, Qi Lianjai gave her a painting. However, she really didn't see it. I haven't had time to see it yet. Qi Lianjai raised his brows, then looked back, don't worry. At this time, the attendant in blue cloth pushed the door open and came in. Seeing Xiaoyu, she was startled and hurriedly saluted her. Xiaoyu realized that he was blocking the position of the door, and moved to the side. Then, Your Highness, I will retire first. The woman was wearing a white robe, and her silky black hair fell forward as she bent over. Qi Lianjai stared at her figure. For some reason, his mood was inexplicably much better. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and he said to her as he turned the corners, Go. The attendant on the side quietly lit incense in the incense burner, and then automatically retreated behind Xiaoyu. On the way back to Yulan courtyard, I happened to meet Huo Shaijun. The man's eyes were bloodshot, and there was a circle of blue under his eyes. At this time, he hurried to the main courtyard, with a few servants behind him holding a pile of books and account books. Huo Shaijun saw Xiaoyu stop for a while. Master Xie, I'll deal with the official business with the crown prince first, and we'll talk about it later. Xiaoyu watched him hurry to the main courtyard, and couldn't help smacking his lips, going crazy. Tell me how much official duties this Wang Yu has added to her and Mr. Huo. Wang Yu, it is really hateful. Walking to the corner of the trail, Xiaoyu picked up a stone and slammed it into the corner. Snapped. A black figure was squatting well on a tree, but was hit by a stone and fell directly to the ground. Hey hey! The man pulled down his mask and smiled embarrassedly. Xiaoyu sighed, why are you still standing on the tree in the daytime? If you don't guard where you should be, you have to rely on the tree to live your whole life. During the day, you can dress up as guards and patrol back and forth, so why are you so embarrassed? The two what to do were ashamed of what the dark guard said. He picked up his head. Commander Xiao asked us to do this. Jin Yiwei Commander Xiao Yi. Speaking of this Jin Yiwei, Xiao really can't get involved. But in the past 2 days, I have asked His Royal Highness the Crown Prince to tell me that the defense mechanism of the mansion is too poor. After complaining, Xiao ignored the dark guard who climbed the top of the tree again, and returned to Yulan courtyard with his hands behind his back. In Yulan courtyard, Xia Ruyi and Xia Abeo had already woken up. The two of them sat on the swing in the middle of the courtyard. When they saw Xiao coming back, they quickly stood up. Lord! Take a rest. Xiao smiled at the two of them, then went into the room by herself, put on a long straight dress with black bamboo embroidered on a white background, and tightly braided her black hair into a braid behind her head, leaving a forehead in front of her. A few strands of broken hair went straight to the study. The Yulan courtyard is very large. Except for the east wing and west wing of the normal building, the main room has doubled its original size. There are several small doors and back doors for the hanging flower gate and the screen outside the courtyard. Assorted windows. There is also a pond with living water inside the Yulan courtyard, which is connected to the main courtyard and leads to the moat together. The prince's mansion is like a small palace, but it is more delicate and full of fireworks than the palace. The clouds in the sky dissipated, and a few strands of golden light fell on the two servants sitting in the courtyard. The swings swayed, intertwining their clothes. The two, one blue and one pink, snuggled together intimately. Xiao lit incense in the house, and the sweet and fragrant pear fragrance swayed in her heart. Through the black branch-picked window, she saw the scene in the courtyard and raised her eyebrows. That's it, take it easy. Xiao wants to wander for a lifetime. She is a person like the wind. She can be the incense on the picture scroll, but she cannot be foolishly trapped in the picture scroll. It should be like this. She thought to herself, smiled and leaned back on the rattan chair, picked up the ancient book and read it casually. The October solar term, autumn will pass, and the sudden cold breath disturbed the nobles. A while ago, the grandson of Jinjinj Gongfu's grandson died suddenly, and some large banquets in the city were not held in order to avoid suspicion. On this day, Shi Shiran, the invitation card for a Liu Feng banquet, was delivered to Xiao's hand. At that time, Xiao had just finished braiding the braid on her head, and her hand took the flower sticker handed over by Xia Ruyi and placed it on the mirror at will. Go to Yinglu. The woman's white fingertips touched her chin and said with a wicked smile, Lianer hasn't seen us for a long time. They hadn't been to Beijing since last year, and they hadn't seen Lianer for nearly 2 years. Ruyi and Abeo looked at each other and cheered. A group of 3 Shi Shiran climbed over the courtyard wall of the prince's mansion. Before leaving, Xiao kicked the dark guard hidden in the tree down, then put on masks and walked to the market center. Far through the crowd, an abrupt spire and red wall high-rise suddenly appeared in everyone's field of vision. Huge mahogany columns on the 2 sides support the plaque in front of the door, which is gilded with plum blossoms on a blue background Yinglu. Under the wide courtyard, only people's heads can be seen flowing. The neck was brought into his own tent. Sizuyale kept pouring down from high-rise buildings, and for a while, it seemed that he had come to a fairyland on earth, and he was not happy. Suddenly a stretcher was lifted out of the door. On the stretcher lay a slender young man in blue clothes with a pale complexion. His cheeks were sunken, his eyes were blue, and he finally murmured something, Lan Xin, Lan Xin. The crowd separated slightly at this time, making some space for the man. The people passing by were not surprised and knew this scene quite well. Yes, another overindulgent son-in-law. Xiao snickered a few times and waved to the 2 behind him, Go, let's hit the autumn wind. The 3 successfully entered the high-rise building through the back door of Yinglu. This building is divided into 5 floors in total. The top floor is the reception room of Lian Er, the owner of Yinglu. Only those who are willing to pay a lot of money can come up to the 5th floor. As soon as the 3 of them entered, they heard several voices one after another. The woman's figure was looming and undulating in the red curtain. Her voice was charming and her body was made of water, tightly wrapped around another figure in the red curtain. Xiaoyu was not surprised by this, sensible, and 2 attendants squatted on the beam. But in the end, it was discovered by Lianer. She raised her hand gracefully, slapped the man in front of her with her fingertips, and turned him over. Go down. The man was excited, but when he heard the words, he immediately put on his clothes and walked towards the stairs with a flushed face, seeing that his anger had not gone out. As soon as the man left, the woman lay on her side, revealing the ravine in front of her, and as soon as she put on the red gauze, she said, "Everyone has come, and are they still hiding?" With a swoosh, a strong wind blew through the air, and when Liana raised her eyes again, the 3 of them appeared like ghosts. "It's a good day, I even found a male pet." Xiaoyu's eyes flashed with envy, and Xia Ruyi and Xia Abao behind him had already picked up the fruits and melons on the table next to them and ate them. Xiaoyu lifted the red curtain with one hand, and saw the woman inside squinting at her like a boneless beauty, with some unsatisfied complaints at the end of her eyes. Xiaoyu quickly rubbed a hand in front of her, sighing that softness, sighed. "Oops, bastard." Lianer was rubbed off by her, and she blamed her, "That child is a top class, and I have been served very comfortably these 2 days. By the way, aren't you guarding our hometown over Qingjiang? Why did you come to the capital?" Yinglu has always been well informed, but has never caught the 3 figures. Xiaoyu walks in the rivers and lakes, known as the Qingjiangdaji. When she first entered the rivers and lakes, she brought a big broad knife picked up from the roadside, and went to the Qing tomb to pick things up, the devil of Qingjiangdaji. The fame spread. "Ah, it has something to do with the imperial court. Now the 3 of us live in the prince's mansion." "Yo Qi Lianjai, I know, you're a good girl. I heard that Qi Lianjai looks decent, but I heard that his health is not very good. If you like it, I'm afraid it will not be easy in the future." Lianer doesn't like weak men, she prefers the one who went downstairs just now. "Fart, I ran errands for him for the sake of making contributions. After I've been busy for a while, I'll go back to my hometown in Qingjiang. There is a big river in Sibei called Qingjiang, and now the Xia family lives in Qingjiang and lives like a master outside the world." Lianer was about to chat with her again, but she saw Xia Ruyi and Xia Abao secretly picking up the veil and stuffing some cakes into their arms. "Hey! Old lady's hibiscus cake, you 2 monkeys want to get rid of me again? Grab food in your mouth." Lianer got up immediately, got out of bed and went to find the shoehorn and chased after the 2 of them. The space on the 5th floor is very large, and after chasing for a long time, Xia Ruyi and Xia Abao finished eating the cakes while running. So when the 3 people came out contentedly, Lianer shouted in a muffled voice behind them, "3 poor ghosts! Get out of here!" Immediately afterwards, a shoe embroidered with gold thread was thrown out. Xiaoyu held the newly acquired pair of dresses in her arms and went back to the prince's mansion happily. It was already night when he returned to the house. Father Tokugawa saw that Xiaoyu was holding a bunch of things in his hand, so he quickly asked the servant to help Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu handed the things over to the servant and asked the servant to follow Xia Ruyi and Xia Abao back to Yulan courtyard. "Father-in-law, can the crown prince return to the manor? Today is not a holiday, and the prince should still be in the political assembly hall." Xiaoyu didn't expect him to be here at this time, and just said hello to the father-in-law of Tokugawa. Tokugawa lit the lantern with a wrinkled smile on his face. "Oh, Miss Xia, the crown prince is looking for you. Follow the old slave." Xiaoyu raised his foot after hearing this and followed him away. The gate of the mansion is a long way from the main courtyard, and the 2 chatted on the road. "Father-in-law, does your highness have anything to do with me? Commander Xiao, Master Xiao is waiting inside. His Highness got the news when you returned to the mansion, and specially asked me to pick you up. The atmosphere of the path at night was a little quiet, and the breeze made Xiaoyu feel at ease. Hearing that Xiao Yi was also inside, he was thinking about it. Without a word, Tokugawa sent her to the gate of the main courtyard and withdrew. The courtyard was covered with dim yellow lanterns. At this time, the servants changed their shifts in an orderly manner. When passing by the branch window in front of the main room, Qi Lianjai clearly saw her. Staring at the air. The woman in sight was wearing a long white straight dress, tied with a black gilded belt around her waist, and the whole skirt became a slim fit. The fine braids on her head gave off a bit of arrogance. Brightened up. There was a smile at the corner of her mouth, and she only nodded slightly to Qi Lianjai, and the figure disappeared, and she had already entered the main room. The author has something to say. Personally, I prefer the subtle feeling of the female protagonist and the male protagonist looking at each other across the air.